Well, first of all, I believe the city should have foreseen this particular budget crisis at least a year and a half ago, because those of us who are in business saw our sales dropping, saw our revenues slowing down, and we knew that we needed to take measures to get through what looked like an economic slowdown. And I think if you read the papers and pay attention to what's going on, you would have foreseen that. So I believe that the projections for this year's budget were faulty in the first place, and that when they did the 08-09 budget, it should have basically been in a crisis mode in terms of looking at the kinds of cuts and the kinds of efficiencies that the city should undertake at that time when the budget was approved in late May. Having said that, I mean, hindsight is always better than foresight, but at this point, I think the city is basically progressing too slowly to address the budget issues. I think that going through the process of identifying priorities is all well and good, but it needs to be done at a much lower level with city staff at the basic level, the department level, the actual staff level, where you really determine as a group how you can cut, how you can provide efficiencies, how you can save pennies, because pennies do count up to dollars. I mean, if we take care of the pennies, the dollars basically fall into place. So I believe that that should have occurred several months ago. But the city they've frozen positions, they have basically stopped hiring anyone. That's good in some ways and not so good in other ways, because if positions are open that actually are revenue generating, whether they're looking at making sure people are paying their business licenses or their taxes, or following the permit requirements that they need to do the business, we should be monitoring that, because those are revenue driven. So we need to look carefully at the positions individually and not be as structured as it appears that they are right now. So they're moving forward, but I believe it's way too slowly. If it were my business, in July 1st, I would have been talking about basically making major cuts, trying to preserve jobs, but also talking with the labor unions, because I believe any discussion of saving money in the city involves serious conversations with the labor groups who make up 80% of the budget. When I was on the city council in the late 90s, they were lean times. We were not flush with money, and we were able to balance budgets. We left unfilled positions, yes, but we were able to balance budgets and still continue programs and take care of business because we were very careful with expenditures, and we had good working relationships with the labor unions. And there were some years when the unions foregoed a salary increase because they understood that in order to get through a tough economic time, we all have to give a little, and it was important to save jobs. So again, I would be in there working very diligently from the lowest employee to the highest employee to figure out how to make this budget sounder, save money, and start building some type of reserve. It's unfortunate that the city doesn't have reserves. The money that was coming in over the last 4 or 5 years was obviously spent on a variety of projects. The county's in a much better position than the city because they've always maintained a very healthy reserve. And good business practices dictate that you put money away for a rainy day and to get through the difficult economic times. And so the city finds itself without real reserves, and so that's where major cuts and major issues have to be addressed. So I would work very hard to improve that situation and get us back on track, because I think I believe the economy is not going to improve over the next year. Things may only get worse, and that we really need to be focused on dealing with this crisis situation that we as a city, we as a nation, and personally feel regarding what's happening with the economy. What are my feelings on that? Well, as you all know, I've been involved with Campaign for Common Ground for 5 years, and that citizens advocacy group tried to influence the policies that went into the general plan that was adopted last December. And I believe, just like the members of that group believe, that it really was a blueprint for urban sprawl. That the general plan that was adopted was a poor document, that it was developer-driven, developer-blessed, that it had all the elements of continuing to sprawl by doubling our population size, by not tackling the tough issues of the environment, building infill, continuing the redevelopment of the downtown, putting into place the tough pieces that are required in a general plan. It was a recipe for basically disaster in terms of what would happen to this city, because it wasn't phased. It was just bringing in all of this land, all in the outskirts of the city. So, having said that, it does not surprise me that the Sierra Club sued, or the Murata Area Association sued, or the Lieutenant Governor or Attorney General Jerry Brown stepped in, because had the city of Stockton approved a general plan that basically took into considerations the things that we know make for good communities, i.e. smart growth principles, planning carefully, growing slowly, doing infill projects, providing affordable housing, building green. Had it done that, he wouldn't have paid any attention to Stockton. I believe that had the plan been a much better plan, he would not have intervened. Because it was so egregious, and I think those were his words, I didn't know that he had said that, but since it was so egregious in his opinion, of course, I believe it was egregious as well, he stepped in, and that forced the issue, forced the city to deal with, a lawsuit. I believe the city came up with a good compromise, a good settlement. I support the settlement. I believe the city council was correct in delaying the actual decision on the settlement to give a little more time for input from the development community on some of the pieces of that original settlement that truly were not well explained, that were not laid out sufficiently for anyone to follow the real intent. So I believe the delay of 2 weeks was warranted. I believe that the city council took the appropriate action last week to approve that settlement, because I believe that what it does really is put meat on the bones of those principles in the general plan that I felt were probably going to be totally ignored, that would just be run roughshod over when you got down to the nitty-gritty of planning and development. So I think that it's a very good thing. I believe that we need to move forward and build along those lines, that if we're going to have this kind of sustainable community that we want. So I support the council's action. I give them credit for doing that, because frankly it was surprising that they took the action that they did. But I believe it was the right thing for this community to do. So I support it. They're greedy. The police union is greedy. They, above all people, should realize their significance in the Stockton city budget, and how their role in it can make or break our city, can send it into bankruptcy or provide an avenue, a path to fiscal solvency. I believe that there are certain contractual provisions that they believe they are entitled to, but again, all provisions of every contract can be reopened, can be renegotiated, and I believe that that's what a responsible council and city management will do, is renegotiate those principles. And times change, economic situations are different, and that what a council might have approved 5 years ago certainly flies in the face of the economic realities of today. So it's important that the police step up to the plate, just like all the other unions, just like everyone who works for the city, and accept their responsibility in helping to solve this crisis. Now, what that might be when it comes to negotiations, I cannot tell you, but I believe that we have to be at the table looking at those provisions that will be important to help solve our fiscal situation, and they are a big player in that, and that's to recognize their importance in our crime fighting efforts, their importance in being the men and women on the streets that keep our city safe. But nevertheless, they too share in our fiscal situation.